Perfect. We've got a whole bunch of people popping in here, which is nice. Hi, everyone. How are you? Welcome. I'm just sitting here chatting with John while we let all of you in. Oh, John, I see Tom on here. I guess we can teach him a thing or two. So you've had a snap of cold weather.
Yeah, it's brutal. What was it? Minus 40 something the other day.
I heard. Oh,
The
yeah.
low. Yeah, it was awful. The vehicles don't like to start.
No, I know, I was just saying that, we've been so fortunate. We've had, I think this week has been the coldest, but it's only been like minus 12 has been the worst. So,
Oh, that's not bad at all.
right. That's like spring for you.
Yeah, this last week was brutal and it kind of keeps on giving. It's yeah, it's
Right.
cold, but it's supposed to be, it's supposed to carry on here shortly.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm just chatting with John. We are going to get started really soon. We're just going to let everybody in. There's just a few more people popping in here, and then we'll get started. And we've got a lot to chat about today. There's so much. And John Fuglestveit, if I said his name right, is a wall covering installer, an expert, an artist, really. And he is in Calgary. And he's been doing this for a number of years. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him once we get started. But for now, I just would let you know that feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. We always love to see that. And if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A or on the chat, whatever you prefer. And we'll get to those at the end after, because John may very well answer your questions as we're going through. So we'll certainly get to those at the end. Oh, we've got someone from Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, Charlene, how are you? Then we've got Michelle. Who else do we have? Rena. Oh, all over the place here.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Okay, so there's going to be more people trickling in here, but I think because I know we have a lot of content to cover, John, we're going to get started.
Get at her.
Great. Oh, Kansas City. Okay, I got to stop reading. I'll be here for Texas, Waterloo, just so many people. It's so neat that, I mean, we're put in, kind of thrown onto video conferencing in such a huge way. I mean, we've all done it before, but obviously during this time it's been so huge. And I think a lot of people are tired of it, but I think a lot of people, it's just been a great way to kind of connect with people. And instead of you and I doing this in person to a group of designers, we can capture people from all over the world. So I just think
I think it's great for something like this. It's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, John, for joining us today. You come very well, highly recommended. And, I know you've worked with our product in the past as well.
Yeah.
And so again, thank you. And I just want to share some background knowledge from so that our guests can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
And they can better understand kind of where you're coming from, your information, and then you can wow them with your knowledge.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let me just pull this over here. My computer's acting up here. Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks again for joining us. It's been quite some time since we've had a webinar. We took a break over the holiday. Thought everyone could use a break from Zoom, but we're back at it, and we have lots of information to share with you. So we're about to launch a new wall covering collection in March, and we thought, well, how perfect would it be? We've been really wanting to get John on and chatting with us about his expertise, and so we thought, well, no better time than now. So as I said, John lives in Calgary. Are you right in Calgary proper?
No, I'm actually I'm in Calgary and the Okanagan. So I did start my business in Calgary for the last it's almost 8 years now. About a year and a half ago, we moved our personal residence. I still have an office out of Calgary, and I still do a lot of work there and service the Okanagan as well. So both places.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So John completed, he has his completion of Journeyman Carpenter Alberta Apprenticeship Program and Red Seal, and attended Mount Royal University Bissett School of Business. So, if that wasn't enough, then he also has obtained so many certificates. He's taken so many courses, really just generally around the knowledge of contracting and construction. He's taken WMIS, Professional Home Builders Institution, Construction Fundamentals, Building Solutions, code courses, and moisture control. So, I really think that speaks volumes to, when you're looking to hire an installer, there's just so many variables to wall covering. And the fact that John is just so well-versed and continues to educate himself really speaks volumes. So he spent many years overseeing projects for a custom home renovation specialist and supervised construction teams for a local home builder. He's had 18 years, although he looked so incredibly young. He's had 18 years of experience maintaining very high standards of craftsmanship and control on residential project sites. John's interest in drop wall coverings is inspired by his enjoyment of working with people, really just operating a small business, and just the feeling of accomplishment of doing such detailed work. John has studied and researched many paper hanging techniques and trade skills from some of the top professionals within North America and Europe. So that's pretty impressive. And in case you're wondering, he is a member of the National Guild of Professional Paper Hangers and also of the WIA, right? The Wall Covering.
So yeah, it used to be called the Guild, and they changed the name of it, and it's now the WIA. So okay. Some people still hold on to the NGPP kind of name and guild, and yeah, they did change the name, so it's the WIA now. But great. So yeah, they're kind of one of the same.
Great. And so you've had drop for how many years?
Almost 8 now, I would say. It's maybe a little bit longer than that if I went back to like when I actually first started hanging, but the company itself is about 7.5, 8 years.
Wonderful. So, and do you have a team that works with you, John, or are you?
That's a good question. I have trained 2 people along the way. I have now gone back to myself for multiple reasons. Wall coverings is a kind of an interesting portion of the construction world, and yeah, I find it kind of easier to manage, and I find it better for work-life balance. It's kind of like the easy response. When you start hiring people and training people, there's a lot more going on, a lot more mechanisms, and I'm really concentrated on, the detail part of it, and just the overall experience of an installation. And I think once you start kind of blowing yourself up, that's really hard to manage.
It is hard to manage.
And so I've gone back to myself.
Yeah. Good. Awesome. Yeah. So we have a couple of questions along the way that we're going to ask our guests just to kind of gauge, get them involved and kind of gauge where they're at. So I'm going to start with the first one before we start our presentation. So the first question for you all is, what motivated you to register for our wall covering webinar today? So if you want to just throw your answer in the poll and let us know, that would be great. Would it be to grow your knowledge, or have you really discovered a lot of issues with wall covering, some frustrations and really needed solutions? I would imagine it's probably a bit of both. But let me just let them finish up here. Wow. Okay. Well, 85% just want to grow their knowledge about wall covering. So no pressure at all, John. Good luck with that.
Where do we
No, I
start?
know.
Do we have like the rest of the day?
Yeah, well, no, you'll have to come back again because I know there's going to be so many questions and I know there's just so much content. So
Yeah,
you've
there is.
done this part and I'm already committing you to come back again
Yeah.
because I know people will want more. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and let's just see here. Where did it go? Give me 1 second. Make sure that we've got it up and running here. It's probably hiding behind my, sorry, oh, there you are. Okay. Now we'll do it. That should work. There you are. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Perfect. I love this photo, by the way. I think it's so amazing. This is the photo. This is on your website, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. It's awesome. So we all know that, I mean, wall covering has never gone away. It's always been obviously enough to keep, you know, you working and many installers working, although it kind of ebbs and flows in its overall popularity. And right now it's, you know, experiencing a nice peak.
Mhm.
And so with that, you know, we always have issues where you've got novice people coming into, whether they're new designers or whether they're, you know, customers just new into the home market and looking to, you know, do some renovations for the first time, use wallpaper for the first time. We know that there can be a real lack of education that can lead to a lot of problems. So
Yeah, it is common. That statement is true. And I have had a handful of designers even say to me that they stopped speccing wall coverings because of the issues they ran into in the past. They that's it. Just want nothing to do with them, which is sad. But
right. It is sad because they're absolutely beautiful, and it's unfortunate when they take that out of the equation because they really do add to the overall aesthetic and trend, you know, to a room. So I'm going to ask one more poll question while we're here. So John has provided this photo for us, and what I would like to know is, let's just start a new question here. Is this wall covering flawed? Yes or no? I'll let you have a look at it there if you can see.
piggyback on your comment there. I mean, it's been around for centuries and it's always been a part of design. You know what, like you said, whether it comes and goes, you look at tapestries, anything like that, it's centuries.
I agree. I think it's, you know, I think what happened, as I recall, I think I was telling you, John, that my parents owned a wall covering store back in the day, a paint and wall covering store. And at that time, it was just all pre-pasted. And I think the paper that was used then and the fact that people were doing it themselves and not preparing the wall and scared people because, you know, trying to tear that down, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So,
That,
you know, it's very different today, right?
and that's what most people refer to is that, I would say, and you know, I'm not going after the vintage here, but like any of the baby boomers, they hear wallpaper and they go, oh my gosh, I've removed wallpaper. I don't ever want it again in my house. And which is sad because there's a handful of variables that, you know, are involved in that, why it did not come off the wall easy.
Right.
But that negative experience is so embedded in their head, if they were a kid or whatever, of scraping that off the wall, they just don't want to ever live that experience again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. So you see the results here. So 72% say no, it's not flawed, and 28% say yes.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
I'm going to get rid of that. And why don't you tell us?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, it is not flawed. It's if people are looking at the left-hand side, the picture's taken, the sun's kind of coming through that way, so you're getting a shadow on the left-hand side of the wall. if that was what kind of pushed people to say no. But the overall, that is a natural grass cloth. That is the natural shading that's in it. And that shading in this stuff is actually very good. And that wall is completely balanced. So there, I call them racing strips. There's no racing strips on there. Every sheet has been hand trimmed to the same width on that overall wall and the bulkhead and the stub walls or the wing walls and all the way around the back side of it. So that is what you're looking for. Grass cloth is one of like my biggest pet peeves of incorrect installations, because a lot of hangers aren't set up to hand trim or don't know how to. Maybe some of them trim on the wall, but what you're looking for is somebody that can do that, that can hand trim and get it balanced. Because often what happens is a hanger that doesn't hang all the time, he's going to start with a seam in the middle of that wall or a panel in the middle of that wall and work his way around and keep every little piece of strip on the wall all the way around. And this would have a totally different feel and look if it was done that way over obviously what you see here in the frame.
Right.
And this is how it should always look in a lot of scenarios.
And it doesn't, sadly. You know, I've seen a lot of scenarios, you know, where you've got, you know, short bits. And you were saying earlier, so I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but you know, you notice more when it's done wrong than when it's done right.
That's humans. I mean, we pick up on the error
Right.
first, right? It's just how it is.
So tell us about this.
So this could be a multitude of things. This could just be that someone overworked the seam or didn't have enough paste, or this was pre-pasted and they worked out all the paste, so there's nothing left on the seam. Or what my guess is, because of how it's cut at the top and how it's kind of wiggles and wobbles there, is that this was an untrimmed product and somebody hand trimmed it on the wall and either cut too deep and cut through the drywall paper, and the seam is popped, and you get what you have here. And what happens is if you cut too deep through the layers and the seam pops, you'll never get it to lay down again, because the substrate is pretty much toast. It's weak right at that point where you want it the strongest, like right at that seam. So could be a multitude of things, but yeah, obviously a poor seam.
And then there's two different things here. We just put them together just because it was easier on the slide. But why don't you speak to the one on the left first, John?
Okay, so the one on the left is a non-woven, and non-wovens is a blend of synthetic and pulp substrate. It's really stable, fantastic to strip. A lot of the manufacturers have gone to it, but there's still many different boutique and many different manufacturers out there that use paperbacks and different substrates. But on the left, what has happened is they've put too much paste on the wall, and that's blushing. So it's not supposed to look spotty like that. That's not the pattern. It's supposed to look the solid color. And you actually won't see that occur until a little bit later, because non-wovens are like a sponge. And you can say they're almost like micro perforating. And if you put too much paste on the wall, it sucks it through, and it can suck it through right to the face. And that's what's happened. But saying that, that's what makes them so great to strip, is that when you wet down a wall or spray down a wall, it holds the moisture like a sponge, and literally non-wovens will just fall off the wall if the right paste is used, obviously, which is a strippable paste. I've seen lots of scenarios where non-strippable clays and other pastes are used on non-wovens, and then they're not going to come off that easy.
Right.
And then
there's no, I mean, I think that the bottom line to a lot of this is there's no one answer. There's not one glue that works for everything. There's not one way of installation. Some wall coverings you have to paste the wall, some you paste the paper, some you do both. I mean, it just depends on, I guess, mostly the wall covering that you're using, but would it also depend on environment, John?
Well, it can, you know, you can have a situation where someone's hung on paint that hasn't cured long enough. That can have weird issues in itself. I don't know if you want to get into wall prep here. Let me know if you do, or if you
Sure.
want
Yeah, actually,
to
let's
get
get
into
into
it.
that. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, in terms of, so kind of shelf what this is on the left, if we're just talking specifically about wall prep, so many people argue about what wall prep should be and blah blah blah. But I mean, if you read in any manufacturer's specifications, almost all of them will say it needs to be 100% acrylic based, whatever the product is that you're putting on.
Right.
Therefore, it's a harder substrate, which you want to be hanging on so that the paste dries slower. Depending on the product you're hanging, it'll dry into the wall or dry through the face.
Mhm.
Again, like a non-wovens, they dry out really fast because they're drying through the face. And the acrylic gives you a harder, stable surface to work on. Flat paint, you never want to hang over. You get chalking, and also it can suck in the paste real fast into the substrate being drywall. And then you can have lifting issues and all sorts of other issues. So we could talk about paint all day long, but if you stick to 100% acrylic, and I'm going to throw a label out there, and usually I wouldn't, but Prep Coat is a great product. I've never had an issue with Prep Coat. I've had issues with other manufacturers, but it dries clear. It's real hard. It's 100% acrylic. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I could get into
yeah.
it. And I always say with a finish, if you look under the National Code of Drywall Finishes in Canada, I'm not sure if the States is the same, but a level 4 finish, or I should say Wallcoverings lands under a level 4 finish. In the national guide, it's in there. And this is just a tip for the designers. Never tell your painters that you're installing wallpaper anywhere. You will save yourself a ton of headache. I'm dead serious. Like, so many issues arise as soon as you tell a painter, oh, the wall coverings are going here. They scrimp on prep. They scrimp on whatever they're going to put on the wall. It's just how it works. And I've ran into so many issues dealing with painters, and then them telling you that I've hung wallpaper in the past for years and this is what it should look like, which is kind of funny because they're painting and you're in there hanging wallpaper. So, you know, it's funny. And I would just say, rule of thumb, they don't need to know because they've already priced the job to complete all surfaces on a level 4 finish. And so they'll have a prime and 2 base coats after prime, which is a good surface to hang on. But an OCD hanger or someone that is really by the book is going to put another coat of acrylic on top of that before they hang. And that's up to them if they want to do that. But a level 4 finish is, you know, is just, it's the best. It's, you know, if you're dealing with the painter prepping the walls, that's all you got to tell them.
Okay, that's really good information.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now tell us about the photo on the right.
So the photo on the right is pattern placement. I mean, obviously it wasn't taken into account at all here. They started somewhere else and just worked around the room. But if you're a designer, I would say, you know, if you have a trusted wall covering guy and you've been over this all the time, then, I mean, we don't need to talk about this, but if you're hiring someone, you need to meet him on the space if there is, especially a geometric involved, or even something that is organic in terms of pattern. Because in small rooms, placement is key. And again, our eye goes to this because this is incorrect. And so a real good installer is going to work around elements first. He's not going to say, oh, a sheet needs to go here, or a sheet needs to go there, or a seam needs to go here. They're going to work around elements in the room, and then you want to overlay whatever the pattern is after that. Like damasks are one that always come to mind because I've seen so many of them that are done incorrectly in my mind. And then a kill point on top of this. I mean, if you're wrapping a room, you're going to have a pattern that's not going to match somewhere in the room. And again, a professional is going to be able to hide that. Sometimes you can make it so you can't even tell. And so again, real important in placement. And we were speaking earlier, Lisa and I, when it comes to grass cloth and panel placement and layouts. I mean, it should coincide with your art too, depending on how far you've done the designer and if you're providing art to the client as well, because that's going to affect art placement. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so, again, that there's another situation where, when it's done wrong, it's the first thing you see and you'll never stop seeing it. And it's not inexpensive. You've invested in the wall covering, you've invested in the paper hanger, and now you're disappointed. It's a lot of money out the door if it's not perfect. So for sure, it's worth the conversation up front.
And someone might say that's an easy fix, but it's not. To fix that, you can't grow anything or shrink anything. You have to redo that wall over. And depending on how they carry around the other wall, or where the pattern is broken in a corner, now you're going to have an elongated square, which is now not a square, it's a rectangle, or it's going to be shrunken. So it's a bigger problem than you actually think when you just look at whatever that is, 3 inches.
And now I would imagine murals are the same scenario, because I mean, there are repeatable murals, but there are also murals where there's a scene and sometimes there's a real focus to that scene. So depending on the size of the wall and the size of the mural, you really have to factor that in, I guess, don't you?
Yeah, I wish I had, I mean, again, we could probably talk all day. I wish I had a picture. I just did an installation last week with chinoiserie panels. And I think, I'm not sure what the conversation was before, but it sounded like there was some other conversation of layout and stuff like that. But another person suggested balancing it on the wall, but the wall was a little bit asymmetrical to a tub that's standing in the middle of the room. And to me, there's only one way to hang. And again, I don't want to come across as like, hard and fast in rule, but I would never balance it in the wall. I took and balanced the first big tree coming out of the faucet of the freestanding tub, because when you walk in the room, that's where all the focal placement is. You're not looking at the wall that's kind of a little bit asymmetrical to the left and the shower on the right.
Right.
So again, there's a lot of stuff jiving there, but
Lots to consider. Oh,
yeah, there is.
so can you explain what happened here? And clearly you didn't do this.
Yeah, no. No, I wouldn't leave this behind. So this is just typical wrapping corners and shrinkage. I mean, there could be other stuff going on in here, like in terms of settlement or whatever. But that being said, it doesn't matter if you wrap corners and you don't. I'm not a believer in wrapping inside corners. You should never have this issue. And so what's happened here is they've wrapped it. It dries, tension occurs on the surface of the sheet. And because the tension is so strong, it pulls off the paste. And what people have to remember with paste, I love it when people call it glue, because it's not glue. Paste is a mechanical bond. It's, these pastes are rice-based, wheat, they're all starch-based. And what happens is it crystallizes and it forms like a tooth bond, on the back of the sheet, kind of like that. So if the surface tension is enough, like let's say on my wrist, it's just going to pop apart. It's going to give. Glue's got, in my mind, it's got more of a chemical base in it, and there's a chemical reaction happening with
Right.
glue. So yeah, it's never going to hold something if it's not wrapped correctly.
Actually, while we're here, so I want to make sure we don't miss out on it. A lot of the issues that we see sometimes, if designers who've purchased our paper will come back to us and say, the seams are splitting apart, thinking that it's a wallpaper issue or like a flaw in the wall covering. Can you explain why that happens?
So super common thing, and it's super common to installers, again, that don't install all the time. A lot of the time, so there's two things that can, again, I could yak about other stuff all day, but two real easy points to this is that either they've oversaturated the paper, so too much paste, and then when it's dried out, so oversaturated, the paper expands more than it needs to. And then when it dries out, it's going to shrink more. So, even a millimeter or two in seams can be very apparent depending on seam or depending on pattern or color or anything like that.
Right.
So excessive paste. And then the second one, which is also common, is so it's kind of both combined. They'll put excessive paste, and then they'll overwork the seams. So they'll roll the crap out of the seams. They'll stretch them over if they didn't get it close enough when they hung it. So they're trying to pull it over and stretch it at the same time and kind of kill the memory in the product. The problem is with non-wovens and other products on the market now, the substrate's so stable is that they're going to go back to where they began. So, if you didn't nicely do that with the proper amount of paste and the right amount of pressure, essentially, and laying that down nice the first time around, and you're literally aggressively working the bejeebies out of that seam, it's going to shrink. And you're going to see it.
Right.
Or if they're double cutting on the wall, and again, they're cutting through the surfaces too deep, same thing can happen.
Yeah.
There's other things to it as well, but those are the kind of the easiest to answer.
Right. And then also overworking the seam, not only can you get splitting seams, but then you can also get on darker papers a whiter line, or on lighter papers a darker line, right? From over.
Yeah, so you can mess the sheen up of the paper is what you're doing. Is if you're overworking it, you change the sheen, and that's why it becomes a very apparent, is because you're changing the sheen on both sides of the panel. And so not only sheen, it could be kind of color what's the word I'm looking for? Discoloration.
Yeah.
Of what's on the surface. And now it actually grows the problem. And your eye sees, it's not like a tangible thing, it's an optical thing. So now your eye picks that up, and it picks that up on every panel across the room, especially if the light comes in and hits it right. I call them shiners. They're like shiners. They've just been they've been overworked.
Great name.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. That's the same paper?
Yeah, it's just that one is shot obviously in different light than the other, and they shot it like that with a flash so that they could pick up on that. So this is metallics. So metallics. Metallics are a funny one because you can get metallic papers that are seamless. But most of the time what happens with those ones is that there's a pattern or kind of an overlay of another gray on top of the metallic. So the foreground is a little bit obscured by the second layer of color, and those can look seamless. So a designer can be like, oh, I've had metallic hung and it was seamless. But then you get to like higher metallics, and this isn't even a high metallic in the picture, but you can get to high metallics where the foreground is almost like a mirror. And there's some manufacturers out there that produce these, and they're very tedious to hang. And no matter what, those are going to panel. And one thing I could throw out there to everybody is I would lose the verbiage of talking about you can see the seams. Most of the time, if it's hung right, it's not the seams, it's paneling effect, and that is part of the product. You're not going to get away from it.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, it's paneling. And if you look on high metallics, they all panel. But what happened here is you had imperfections in the substrate that might not even be seen by the eye when they hung this. But after it sucked and dried tight, as you see telegraphing. So now that comes apparent. And unfortunately, because of metallics, they show everything because they're like a little bit of a mirror. And I kind of say that too with metallics when they get kind of on the spectrum of higher metallics to more of the mirror. When you butt two of those seams together, it's like butting two mirrors together. They reflect on each other a little bit. So that seam's always going to look a little darker, even if it's just a hair. You could roll that thing all day long and do whatever you want to it. No matter what, it's not going to completely go away. And especially light has such an effect on metallics. When light comes through on a certain day, it's going to pick things up and it's going to pound them more than other times of the day. And again, designers have to be aware of that when selecting for the product is knowing your client. You know, are they an engineer? Are they an accountant? Are they super detailed? Are they going to nitpick every little thing apart? If they are, don't sell them wallpaper.
Right.
Or you have to let them know what they want has limitations as well.
Right.
And I find if they know that up front, you know, like grass cloth or any of the natural fabrics, they're prepared for it. So anyways, I'm going off now on a tangent.
No, but it's so, I mean, it's so true. I can actually see the image. I don't know if you can see my cursor there, but I can see the image of where the flash has gone off. And even I think feet or legs here, it really does act like a mirror. And then right in this kind of the center, just below center there on the left of the darker panel, you can see that paint, you know, where the paint was off in the background. It really.
And this is I was told that this isn't my photo, but I was told that that's actually the drywall seam that's picking up there as well, even though it was floated out.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, even though it was floated out. So I'm not sure how 100% accurate that is because it's not my photo, but it's a good photo to show what it looks like in daylight and then what it looks like when it's darker and you got a flash on it.
Right.
And so if somebody comes into a bathroom without the light on and the door shut, they'll see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's prominent.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. What do we have here?
So based on the surface, with a lot of wall coverings, you can get away with wiping paste off the surface and working messy. You don't ever want to hire a messy paper hanger. It's funny, I once had a designer say to me, I'll never hire a painter that has paint all over their clothes. She says it reflects on how they paint. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And to me, it's kind of the same kind of mind thought to a paper hanger. They shouldn't have paste on their clothes. They shouldn't be full of paste. They should be working as clean as possible.
Yeah.
And this is paste on the surface. And they got called on it and they came back and they tried to wipe it off. Unfortunately, this manufacturer here does a traditional style of printing where that's paint, real paint on the surface. And they've wiped the bejeebies out of it and it's just lifted the pigment right off the top of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with an acrylic paper, yeah, you can get away with wiping the surface on it. You know, it's way more washable. A type 2, you could scrub it. You can almost pressure wash it. Like I use type 2 in my personal garage as a backsplash. So, you know, you can go all that way with wall coverings, but then you come back this way on the spectrum. And then on the left-hand side, you have a natural fabric or a grass cloth. And that's paste next to the baseboard. So they got into a tight spot there, obviously, folded the corner over. They had too much excess of paper on the left-hand side, folded it over, tried to cut it off on that baseboard and got paste over it. And both of these cannot be rectified. You got to replace. You can't repair any of this. They're toast.
Yeah, wow, that's so unfortunate. And the one on the right, we have some of those finishes as well. I think they call it a milk finish.
Yes.
And so we've had instances where during installation, during the smoothing process, they've used, instead of using a sponge or a more delicate applicator, they've used something hard, like a hard plastic, and it can actually scrape the surface of the milk finish too. So
yeah, so the milk finish is kind of like, for lack of better words, it's kind of crustier or harder finish.
Right. Because
they get that there's usually acrylic in it and they get that sheen off of it as well. And you're right. And it says right in all the delicates, it's horsehair brush, no squeegees or foam rollers. A professional installer is going to have a range of all that stuff with them at all times. And absolutely. You cannot drag a hard squeegee over that surface. And you can almost tell, like in the middle of that image there, you can see almost like a sweep pattern where it's missing color up the
Yeah.
middle. You see that? And
Yep.
see how there's kind of like a sweep pattern to it?
Mm-hmm.
And that could be it as well, that because they've taken the finish off up in kind of the middle right there as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, yeah. And that's another thing that, okay, so this, what we see here, again, another inside corner that's just wrapped. It could maybe be a little bit overlaid. It's hard to tell, but regardless, this is a natural good. And what I've found in the last probably 4 years is because you're seeing a lot more of the natural goods out there.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they're my favorite. But you have over pasting, and this is someone that's either put more paste in the inside corner thinking that it's going to hold down their product better in an inside corner, and they wrapped it. And let's say they took a brush and they put some paste in there first before they got there with the material, and the material let's say they put paste on the back of the material on a pasting board somewhere, and then they put paste down that, waited a bit, come and then hung over there and squeezed into that surface. It's oversaturated and soaked right through the face. And again, it's toast. It's naturals. I would never, I'd never, and I'm saying this, I'd never trust, and I might have a backslash of this, but I'd never trust a painter with this stuff because it's so fragile and so finicky that a professional paper hanger, someone that deals with fabrics and delicates all the time, should only be touching this stuff because of even weird stuff like this, where just a little bit too much paste saturates through the face. And not only that, too much face can actually delaminate the paper backing from the face of the goods as well before it even gets to the wall. So it's, again, it's a weird science.
It's not as easy as one would think.
Well, and like you pointed out at the beginning, everyone's, heard and kind of used to the old days where you dunk the stuff in the water and slap it on the wall and you can make a mess and wipe the surface off. And there's a very small portion of that product that still exists. And it's really, really dedicated to the DIYers. And you can still pick it up in the big box stores. I mean,
Right.
There's the odd time that I run past pre-pasted stuff, and there's one manufacturer that produces a lot of it now. But it's not in the same category of product, obviously.
No, you can't get the design and the construction and the interest and the detail and yeah. So tell us about this. I see a couple of things wrong here. So why don't you start with the one on the left, John?
So the one on the left, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, the images are kind of grainy. It's kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but so on the left one, you got, thank you. You got that probably 3 or 4 inch strip on the left side of the bulkhead. So I firmly believe if you're hiring a professional and someone that is equipped, has the skills, has the tools to produce, that should never happen. No matter what it was on the left side there before that, because a lot of people would argue, I started with a full sheet out of the corner and that's what got me there, and this, that, and the other thing. Doesn't matter. That line, that joint, because it's grass cloth, and again, you're going to see paneling in grass cloths, and some you don't see or as apparent as others. Basket weaves, depending on the color, can kind of disappear. But when you get into the darker stuff like this, it's always going to be more apparent, and more apparent with different manufacturers over others. But that layout should have never happened. That vertical seam should have went up in the corner of the bulkhead there on the left-hand side, and they should have hand trimmed all the equal pieces across the bulkhead. Like, personally, I'd be devastated with that. And that's the other thing, is because, and I'm not trying to be over dramatic, the product's not cheap. So at the end of the day, it should be perfectly balanced as close as possible on every wall, on every element, on every wall sconce, on every art light, and all that stuff. It should be laid out and engineered before the room is even started. And that's the difference to hiring a professional, is because a lot of people will just start in a corner and work their way around the room, which is brutal. But anyways.
Right. And the
That's
same
working
thing
on it.
here on the right.
Yeah, it's hard because this doesn't pick it up totally good, but you can get the idea. That's not 36 inches. That's a leftover piece. And if you see on the right-hand side, they've used it to carry around the corner there.
Yeah.
And again, just improper layout. And a lot of people, just don't have the hand skill or trimming skill to balance everything and do it. It's just not in their wheelhouse. And you do get a lot of people that just hang rolled goods, and they're very comfortable with that, and they're really good with it. And when I say rolled goods, I mean Euro rolls, or American doubles is what some people call the stuff produced out of the States. That's 27 inches wide. But anything coming out of the UK or overseas is going to be 53 centimeters or 20 and a half inches. And they can do wonderful stuff with that. But that's what they're comfortable with. I feel like once you get into the next category of, any of the natural stuff or the hand screened, or any of the custom murals or anything with salvage that needs to be hand trimmed or double cut, it's leave it up to the professionals.
I agree. I want to just ask you a question, or maybe just throw this out there as well to to a lot of the designers. So there are a lot of different types of natural papers out there, natural wall coverings out there, grass cloth being the most common, and it's usually the small reed grass cloth, or the paper weave is very common.
Sisal.
Yeah, but there's also, the larger bamboo, and, where you have real, thicker pieces of bamboo going through the product. And so there's two things there. It's not fun to cut. It can be very, very tricky. And also it doesn't necessarily match up, does it? Because
No.
you could have a piece of grass sticking out where, so can you?
So I have the designers I work for know this. I have a clause that I put in everything for almost a lot of materials. And it's not there to say like I have no liability for it. It's there just really to inform and give information. That's all it's there for. And so you're using the extreme, the product you're using is extreme. You get into jute or the bigger stuff, and you get big fat variations between big reeds and small reeds and all that stuff. So then when that comes together, you could have a section of fat reeds meeting a section of small reeds. And, why didn't you move that down 6 inches to match? Because if you did that, you'd burn through a ton of material and you wouldn't finish the job. And two, that is the product. So if you're selling that product, I often say, if you're a new designer, or even if you've been in the industry for a long time and you've had issues with selling grass cloth or natural fabrics and you just really want them in your projects, I always say just do your due diligence of you. A lot of manufacturers, I don't know if you guys do, but they'll send you a bigger memo sample if you ask for one or pay for one. And if you're investing into a room or into a house, I mean, it's the best investment that they can see. And then you can take that and you can cut that big piece of memo sample and you can butt it together. It doesn't have to be a perfect, nice cut, and say, this is what it's going to resemble. A professional seller is going to hand trim and make those really tight and nice. But I would never sell anything off of a memo sample when it comes to natural products. I would try to get a bigger sample, or make sure you go and you collect enough imagery for your client that they know that it's going to panel. Again, don't say seams, it's panels. And it's beautiful, even if it panels at the end of the day. And I think that is one of the things that people kind of fall into is selling something like that or a product like that off of a memo sample. And and just remember, if you find grass cloth online that has no seams, it ain't real.
It's vinyl.
It's faux grass cloth. And it's produced on a rotary. I mean, that stuff is produced on a rotary cylinder, and it has a repeat to it, and you can find a repeat and you can make it look flawless. I've hung a ton of it, but don't get it twisted.
Sorry,
don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. They're not the same thing, and nor do they look or feel the same.
The one on the left there there you see is a color. Now, would you paint the wall behind that the same color before installing?
Which one, left-hand side?
Yeah.
You're asking a tricky question. So, yes, you know what, the best practice is to paint out the wall, to prime it and tint it to the wall covering type. Yes. But there's lots of scenarios, and there's a lot of customers out there, because they know I've hung black grass cloth over white walls and not have an issue. And
Right.
again, that comes over time, and that comes over knowing saturation points of products and stuff like that, where you're going to have very little shrinkage. And so, but it does alleviate a lot of headaches. Yes.
So for those listening right now, I mean, we still have more to go, of course, but it's overwhelming the amount of knowledge that really skilled wallpaper hangers have, and John obviously being at the top of his class. And so it is so important to make sure that when we've had so many designers say, I've been using my guy for years, he's done it for years, but sometimes that doesn't mean that they're the best, because there's new things coming out all the time. And if you're not staying abreast of the newest product and kind of learning and on the fly and a part of an association, so that you can learn all these new techniques and so on, you can mess up pretty quickly. And so it's just so important to make sure to ask your installer. That's why John's giving you this information about how it should look, and using terminology like paneling to manage your customers' expectations. And it's just so important. So I just had to say that because you're just a wealth of knowledge, and it can be a little overwhelming, I think, to some. But I think, John, most designers just need to get the right person installing, and that takes away a lot of the issues with any
Yeah.
wall covering installation, but particularly some of these more specialties.
Yeah. And even if the designer, I think the other thing too is the designer is in a tough spot, because if they are venturing into the wall covering world for the first time as well, that they don't just go with the person that everyone is like, oh, he's the best, because that can be dangerous too.
Yeah.
If I was a designer, I would still talk to, like anything, I would talk to a few or a couple, and use your personal guidance, your gut feeling. Take all the information that these three people have given you, and try to make a logical process in your mind as a designer of what's fitting, and then go from there. Because if you're a new designer, I mean, the typical person is going to just take all that information as the Bible right away, right? And it might not always be. And again, somebody can hang differently than I hang. It's not a hard and fast rule. So, and now you're taking that information, and I find if you build that relationship with that individual, not only are you going to grow the knowledge of the product quicker, you're going to have a happier client, you're going to sell more wall coverings, you're going to be able to change your designs and add that element, and just, take your design to a different place. So yeah, it's important for sure.
Right. Now I'm going to skip over this. We've spoken to it before because I want people to
Yeah.
see your work. So this is drop wall covering, and I'm sure many of our people here with you, joining us today, are going to ask if you'll travel all over the world to go and hang their wall coverings. But
Yeah.
so this is really so lovely. This is some of John's work, and you just see, look at how beautiful those corners, the internal and the external corners are there. They're just absolutely stunning. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And
So,
go ahead.
and yeah, that's just, again, time and different technique. Like, you can obviously tell that the inside corners aren't wrapped. They're real tight and skinny. If you just wrap that around the edge, that it's going to be fat in the inside corner. And I could tell you about the issues of what happens when you just wrap an inside corner and continue out. But I'm not really here to tell you how to install wallpaper.
Right.
But I mean, it's a common practice that people will do.
Beautiful. And there's a mural there.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I don't know if you want me to say who that is, but
Okay.
that's a Crown product, and that's area environments. And again, those guys are a beautiful product, and it's a big scale, and that's untrimmed product, and that's a one shot deal.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no there's no do-overs. Like I could tell you what the cost of that is, not that it matters, but it's not cheap. So if
Right.
it, and then the problem is if you do mess up on one of those, a lot of individuals think that you can get you can get a panel reprinted. You sure can. It's not going to match though.
Mm,
If the die, even out, if you talk to a lot of printers, I mean, they'll never guarantee that it can, and that goes back to die lots. I mean, never guarantee that that's going to look the same. Anyway,
it's impossible to, to match paint or make batches of paint that are the same each time, because a lot of people don't understand that still a lot of wall covering manufacturers are hand blending the dyes for the wall covering. And that's still, the trained dye is still the best. But you're never going to have it perfect. And there's so many variables. There's climate that makes a difference. There's the dust that makes a difference. The person doing it, even the same person, doing it twice will never make it the same way. It just,
so you've obviously been in mills, because the only place, so, well, how mmany years ago? I think about 7 years ago, we got to go through the WIA, we got to go to London, and we did mill tours. So Amnesty I've been through, and a few others. And I always thought like a computer
yeah,
would pump out these codes of paint.
no,
And there's literally a guy there hand mixing it for like a full batch run. And you're like, no way. And he's putting it up on the color board and matching it to the sample run. And I'm just like, that's crazy. Like, I never thought.
yeah,
It's cool though.
it is. It's very cool. I love it actually. And it's, it's something that computers haven't taken over. So
Yeah,
uh, this is really nice. Is this Schumacher?
that is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very,
that's, yeah, Queen of Spain, and then I forget the one on top, but that is Schumacher and Schumacher. Yeah.
very nice.
Can I throw her name out there?
What's that?
Karen Fron that's her,
Ah,
the designer.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Absolutely beautiful. And are you still finding that you're doing a lot of ceilings?
I do a lot of ceilings.
Yeah.
I actually just did with another product a couple months ago. I did in Whistler. I did a triple garage ceiling with mica.
Wow.
The whole ceiling, yeah, it was mica, done in mica. But lots of ceilings. I do tons of ceilings. I love this because it's interesting, like the split with the rail, and it's cool because if you saw, it's hard to explain because you only get this capture, but the powder room is very small and very tall walls. I think they were 12 or 14 feet in that room.
Oh
I
my.
forget.
Wow.
Yeah, so when you walked into it, it felt like a cavern, but to pull the ceiling not lying down like this and to do the same, yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah, it's very nice. Beautifully done. Oh, this looks familiar.
Yeah, that's familiar. So beads. I think you guys have kind of you guys still do the real glass bead. So
We do, yes. I mean, we don't do as much now. I feel,
went to the acrylic.
yeah, yeah. But and even beads in general, I think we're, you're seeing less and less of, but they're still incredibly, incredibly popular.
Yeah, and they're gorgeous. Like you can tell here just the effect the light has on them.
Mhm.
Like they'll pop in certain light and then they'll blend out in others. It's kind of like you get kind of the ombre effect sometimes, but with no color. So there's the two fields. There's the real glass acrylic, or there's the real glass beads, which is what we see here. And in the real glass beads, you sometimes get a black bead or a black imperfection, and it's part of it. And if that, very type A person, which is fine, like obviously I am, because that's what I do for a living. Some people might not like it. And you can pick out that bead and replace it with another one. If you so do, if you feel like you want to entertain that, and you can do it, but it's a slippery slope. These are way more fragile in terms of how they even sit on the paper and how they're adhered to the paper, because they don't cluster. This might sound super nerdy, but here we go. They don't cluster and hold together. And when I was in Annecy and seeing how they do the acrylic beads and they run them through, how it's ran through the machine and how they process, I never knew this, but acrylic will kind of bond to each other in a number count better and hold together better. It's weird. Kind of they create a tooth amongst each other. And I think it's because they're not perfectly round and symmetrical like glass beads are.
Right.
And there are installers that won't even touch this stuff, or have had very bad experiences with it. But you have to be very, very methodical, very slow. And I always say you have to price for glass beads.
Yeah.
This isn't and you can't, even a horsehair brush on this, you have to be careful. I use a foam roller myself, but again, they're beautiful. They do add another dimension to the room.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll ever go away. But I think my gut could be in, you could tell me if I'm hot or cold, but is that you've had a lot of installers, with feedback with glass beads.
For the amount that we've sold over the years, I'm surprised we haven't had more. So yes, we've had feedback, but in proportion to sales, I'd say it's been relatively low. I think the glass beads the glass is just heavier than the acrylic. So I think, it's just different in that way for installation, but also, the problems that we've had are obviously when you cut, the beads dislodge.
Yep.
Right. And so sometimes you do have to replace a few back, because you'll see a gap once you've installed. And then sometimes, if you make sure that, the back is, you have to make sure the back of the wall covering is unencumbered. It doesn't have any beads. Beads don't collect in the glue. Because especially in a pattern like this, John, right? If there's a bead in behind that, it could be a real problem. You'll see it, or it could actually perforate the surface if it's rubbed too hard on installation. So
correct.
And flock, I think, can be that way too, although flock isn't as tricky in the fact that it's heavy or sharp, but flocking is the same, where when you cut it, some of the flock will naturally just fall away when you're cutting it. And you have to make sure that on the back of that, there's nothing either, because you'll have bumps in your.
You're right. And with both of those, you have to work to the point where you're trying to never wipe the face. Like I've removed some flock and some glass beads, not installed by me, but just because it's covered in paste, you have no grace, like zero. So
right.
You can't wipe. I always say, I joke with glass beads when people ask me about it. I say it's like doing a white glue craft on the beach and trying not to get any sand into anything.
Yeah, good luck. Now, is this a room that your wife did?
Yeah.
Was it one of hers?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. She did a lovely job.
Yeah, she did this one.
And this, we showed this, we saw something earlier, where someone tried to wrap wall covering around a limestone mantle and just butchered it. It was terrible. But this is not.
Yeah, this isn't. And the funny thing is, I wish you had like the front shot of this, because the reason you see this little strip here is just so everybody knows that's actually a color change in the pattern. And when I hung it vertical, obviously vertical, but I hung it balanced in the mantle so that the color variation in between strips did disappear around the return. So you didn't see it on the front aspect of it as well. So that's what that is. But yeah, again, a professional is going to be able to cut around all these surfaces, get into all these areas without tearing, around the mantle, all those things. this is really what separates even kind of the guy that doesn't do it every day to even like the painter that touches them once in a while. This is where things get messy for most people. Because
You were gonna say the men from the boys, weren't you?
no, no, I was actually going to say DIYer, to be honest. But yeah, with these, because this was a full-on fireplace chase, so very long drops, and there's a ton of tension in the sheets, so they'll tear easily.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You did a lovely job. And this, oh my gosh, this was from, I think the book was called Velocity or Just Stripes, maybe Just Stripes. Oh, that would make sense, wouldn't it? And you've
Yeah.
hung this horizontally, and it's,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, absolutely beautiful.
So yeah, so speaking about a balance and everything and elements, again, I feel like I'm kind of coaching other installers out there, but you should never be hanging to the sheet. Like that shouldn't be the conversation. It should be to the elements in the room. And you walk into this office and you see it's an arch opening to this office. And so I balance the stripes, if you see on the right-hand side, to the transom window. So, which also worked out great for the ceiling line, but it's amazing what that can do to the overall feel of the room. It just feels right.
Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, it's discontinued, and I wish it wasn't now. So
Yeah.
it looks amazing. You did a great job.
Yeah, it's a good nautical feel.
We'll just finish up a few more. If there's anything you want to speak to specifically, you stop me, because I want to make sure we get to people's questions as well. This is beautiful.
Yeah, some more grass cloth. Yeah.
Wow, this is lovely.
Yeah. So this guy's a Calico. That's a company that, no, the one above there. So the metallic, the gold and white. That's I did that quite a few years ago, but same deal. Like I'll just say it. The designer actually didn't even want to handle the goods because it was so expensive. The contractor did. She wanted nothing to do with it. And that's handmade out of the States. Again, it's a one-shot deal, and that's all untrimmed product. Wow. So you're hand trimming all those pieces.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's cork on the ceiling there.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, it's funny because it kind of picks up the seam a little bit, but that's paneling again. Like there's no paste on that surface or anything, but you can see the way the light's coming through.
Right.
There's a seam right down the middle, but that's cork. So again, and there's tons of arguments out there about how you hang natural goods with terms of shading. For all the designers out there, I find sometimes the instruction is quite funny when it comes to natural goods. It says, lay them out on the floor and find the best shading and da 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 da. I find that hilarious because if you lay anything out on the floor, it's not going to look the same as if it's vertical and natural light on a wall. So very, very tough to do. And you just have to be that person that wants to try to get the shading as best possible, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, you did it. This is amazing.
Yeah. And again, that's a competitor's grass cloth, and that's Sisal, if my memory's right. That's really, really small grain, like you're saying. And you can't even pick it. The reason you can pick up the seam on the right-hand side is again, the way the sun's coming through in the Photoshop. But on the left-hand side, you don't even see them. There's actually one right up the middle, one left and right of the opening for the fireplace. And then I divide from the fireplace to the wall equally. So anyways.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest surprise to a lot of people is that grass cloth really should be cut to fit the wall. You map it out that way. I don't think a lot of people would know that. So I'm going to go to questions, but just before I do, so a couple of things, John, I think we want to answer, and one of them is, what is the one thing, if you could give one piece of advice to a designer? I know there's tons, but think of the biggest mistake that is made all the time for you, and what would that piece of advice be?
I think that I would say selling off a memo sample and not speaking to the entire product.
Right.
And telling them that's what it's going to look like. That to me is probably the best piece of advice, because if the designer is going to go far enough to educate themselves on the product, the memo sample is just used for a color in scheme of overall palette, and then
Right.
you go from there. I would say that alleviates a ton, but then that comes back to the designer wanting the knowledge, wanting the product knowledge, and also delivering that as well. She can know it, or he. I keep saying she. I feel like I only work for female designers. I work for a lot. I feel like a lot. I work for a lot of male designers too. But I think that they can alleviate a lot of issues by doing that. I could jabber on forever, but I'm just trying to condense
Yeah.
it.
And then I think the other thing that, for me, one of the most important things is to bring the installer in sooner rather than later. So, bring them into the process a little sooner, because maybe that if they can talk to you about some of the features and benefits, pros and cons of the paper selection that you've made, you may choose your mind. You might not decide to go that way. There's a whole bunch of things that, because they work with it every day, that they would know that you wouldn't. So I know it's kind of difficult in some ways to do that, but if you have a really good relationship with your installer, I think you can trust them to help you with those. Not, from an aesthetic point of view, you're the designer, you know what's right for your project, but just in terms of a functionality, how it's going to perform and how it's going to look.
You beat me to it. If you're working with a professional installer, he's not going to get involved in your design,
Right.
or she, and he or she is not going to get involved with your client. My client is the designer, and it ends there. Yes, I provide a service, but they should never be speaking about a designer's, and I say this because I've been in these situations. They should never be speaking, because the designer has sold whatever it may be. It doesn't matter to me if it's rainbows and lollipops. If they sold that, that's what they sold, and that's what they agreed upon with the client. You just got to deliver the rainbow and lollipop at the end of the day. And I think that's super key to what you're saying. And just one more piggyback on that, you made me think of it. In terms of scheduling wall covering individuals, again, if your guy or gal is professional, they're going to be very clean. You want them in at the very end. You want them in just before clean or after clean. You might have a person that wants to be in before the plumbing's installed, i.e. toilets or whatever. It's not worth it. For trade damage at the end of the day, it is not worth it. And that's when you schedule them. And if your builder's not willing to give you time, then you do the handover and they come in after and spend whatever time they need to do the wall coverings. And then your client moves their furniture and everything else in. It's worth the time. Trade damage is insane when it comes to wall coverings. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah. Well, paint's easy enough to do a little touch up, right? So
that's right.
okay. So I'm just going to read through. So how do we as designers know what type of pasting method the installer should do? The specs on the installation are extremely general and don't apply to specific papers.
That is absolutely correct. And that goes back to, he better be a professional on it, and he better know what goes on what product. And if he's going to give you the excuse of this happened because I put the wrong paste on it, I'm making an assumption that this is where this is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That's a poor excuse. Because if he's unsure, he should test with a piece with different products before he just drives into it and does your whole room.
Right.
And yes, there's also a reason why the manufacturers are vague, because you have the two takes. You have the vague recommendation, and so the manufacturer never comes back on them. They're never liable for anything. Okay, that's the truth.
It's true.
The second one is that they'll specify the exact paste you need, because that manufacturer sells that paste and makes a lot of profit margin off there. Some of those pastes are unattainable here in North America. Lots of them are from overseas. You can get them. But if your installer knows what he's doing, I go back to, he should have tested, and he should test with 3 different types of pastes. There's multiple types of paste, even in North America. There's tons. So, like I said, some are rice, some are wheat, some are clay. Some have a little bit of different kind of additives in them in terms of not natural, would be the easiest way to explain it.
Right.
And they all have different side effects, and some stain more than others. Absolutely. They should know that. That's why they're a professional. You
Right.
as a designer, that shouldn't even be something you should be discussing.
I think the biggest thing is to make sure that when you're interviewing installers that you're going to use frequently, ask those tough
Yeah.
questions, about testing, about placement and so on and so forth. And then, I think that at that point, then it's okay to just kind of let them do their thing because you've built up a trust. So,
100%. And then
right,
if you ever do get into those scenarios, here's a great thing of having trust with an installer. If they are loyal to you and you have done a lot of work together, we're not all perfect. I'm not standing here saying I've never screwed up. Every one of us have, because we deal with delicate stuff. You go, oh crap, I screwed up. The first thing you do is you pick up the phone, you make sure the same batch number still exists, and you order it. You figure out the rest later.
right.
But at the end of the day, you want your client to be happy, and you want that ripple to be very small, and you move on with life.
Right.
Life.
And the whole thing is if you've ordered, you know, all installers, especially with as the paper gets more delicate, you have to order enough to allow for a strip going wrong or cutting out cutting out a
Shading.
flaw or doing whatever you need to do. You should be allowing that. You said 20%, I think, right?
Well, let me piggyback on that. I was saying another 10% for wastage, because I think you're remembering our first conversation. So designers out there that have done tons of grass cloth, yes, it takes more grass cloth to do balance sheets everywhere, whatever. If they're investing in grass cloth, it's a small portion. That's not something to die on. Two is, some people say an extra roll in terms of shading and other issues you can run into in naturals. There's all sorts of weird stuff you can run into.
Mhm.
Three, I always say, what's under the stairs in a brand new house when they turn a house over? There's a box of hardwood. There's a box of grout. There's a box of tile. There's 2 cans of paint, blah, blah, blah. But nobody wants to have a roll of wallpaper left over. I don't get it. I still don't get it after all these years, because it can alleviate a whole lot of headache.
That's so true. I know. I couldn't agree with you more.
And it's mind blowing. It's like, so anyways, I don't want to sound like I'm ranting, but so tell your client there's going to be leftover. There could be a total roll left over, because you know what? When you have company over and you throw that big shaker and somebody puts something through the wall, my guy can come back and fix it. You have the same batch number, not an issue. It's a zero issue.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I've been in these scenarios where I go back, there's no wallpaper on site, and it's tear off the whole wall and redo the whole wall.
You have to. There's,
There's nothing you can do.
I want to
So-
read you some of these comments. Tara says, this has been incredibly informative. She'll never look at wall covering the same way. I have Stacy asking, as a designer, what is the most important items to give you as an installer? So,
Great question.
yeah.
I'm looking around because I've had these. Oh, I can't see them anywhere. I was going to stick them up against the screen. So in terms of providing your, I mean, the easy answer to this, and this is not a self plug, go onto my website and go on to request a quote form. All those questions are what you're looking for. If you have a guy that's professional, he needs all that information. And I even do have on mine that I ask if you're a designer or not, because I really work for kind of trade only, essentially, at the end of the day. So, but I have wall dimensions, product information. You can upload a plan, you can upload images, all that stuff is on there. Really, your guy shouldn't have to come to site. If you've established that relationship, they should be able to, if he's a professional, he can read plans and all that stuff. He should be able to do a takeoff off a proper plan, elevation and floor plan, and be pretty dang close. And if there's, always say if there's weird things with designers, if there's like rake ceilings where the ceiling goes from 8 feet to 12 feet, or it's a funny ceiling, or there's just kind of weird elements in play, then I'll go to site and do a physical measure. But there are a lot of things you can do without, and it saves everybody time.
Right. Well, that's great. And we're actually, for those who uh, may have this question, we will be sending the link to the video to watch this, as this is going to be recorded for anyone who signed up. We're not sharing it in general, but just for the people who signed up for the course or for the webinar. And then also we'll put John's website on there, so you can go and peruse and have a look and send him a friendly email. And
Uh-oh.
yeah, you're intrigued now. So Kara is asking, for a commercial vinyl application, what do you use to prime the wall?
I'm allergic to it. No, I'm just joking.
Uh,
Are you asking as if the hanger primes or if the painter primes? And can she answer that on live time?
For a commercial vinyl application, what product do you use to prime the wall to protect the face paper? Oh, sorry, to protect the face paper of the GWB against future removal.
Yeah, so she's just asking for primer. What primer do I use?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. It's a slippery slope between, so I would never take on the priming for a contract job, on a commercial job, sorry. And that's where you're gonna find, I think that's what you're asking, on a commercial job.
Yep.
That liability should never be taken on by a hanger. That's not that I can't do it. There are other weird things in that can come into play in terms of substrates and moisture and all sorts of strange things that can occur. And I'm sure you probably know of this, and that's why you're asking this question. I leave that up to the painters, and the painters have to confirm what is specified. And sometimes the architects will specify the primer as well. And I stay out of that because I don't want any liability towards it. Again, I use Prep Coat, which is 100% acrylic on my stuff. Yes, I'll use it on smaller jobs for type 2 commercial. But if you're talking like a big job, and I know in the States, because I'm part of the WIA, a lot of them do prime their own stuff, and they stick to draw tight. I know that that's one that they have a lot of success with. Romans also produces RX35 is another acrylic primer, kind of a bonding primer. It dries tacky. But yeah, on the commercial end of things, I stay out of that scope.
Okay, good. Just a couple more questions and I think we're good. So Stacy's asking, what are the organizations to try and find a qualified installer? The biggest problem is finding installers in his area. You should start you should start a school to teach people how to install. You kind of went there and then circled back again, right?
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. It's really WIA. I mean, like, that's how I got dialed into all this. I came from the industry really, and I came from a background of high detail work in terms of finishing and stuff like that. And then spent time with a great couple that kind of mentored me for quite some time. And I'm still very connected with them. And they're the ones that connected me with the WIA. And I spent the money and I spent the time. I got on a plane. I went down to the States every year. Obviously not last year, but they do the table talks. They run you through all the crazy weird stuff. And it's a fantastic, I'm going to plug them right now because I wouldn't be where I am in the time period I am if it wasn't for them. It's great. You meet people from New York, Chicago, Australia, Europe, all over the place. Like all these people in one spot, and there's nowhere else you can get that because the painting ticket brushes over wall coverings. I think now it's not even in existence in a lot of them. They've taken it out of the Red Seal painting ticket itself.
Right.
So that's all I can say to you. Unless you find somebody that's willing to teach you, and that's probably all I could throw your way to encourage you. It's a tough one. And the thing with wall covering installers, I'll say this right now, you take a huge risk for what you make. You take a huge risk.
Yeah.
You're
you have to love what you do.
You do. This can't be like, oh, I think I'm gonna turn this into a business right away and this is what I'm gonna do. When I first started, I never looked at it this way, but the more time I spent in it, is you are creating a relationship with the designer, and you are taking on their risk for them, and trying to, produce the best possible without any issues. Because with wall coverings, you're going to run into all sorts of stuff you never thought were going to come your way.
It's tricky for sure. And I applaud you. Like I said, I think you're artists in what you do, and the attention to detail, and it really is. And, unfortunately, there's not as many. I mean, there may be now based on the interest, but I mean, you are, and I really don't know how old you are, but you are young, in this industry. There's not you are.
Oh,
And
yeah.
unfortunately, you don't see a lot of people getting into it. So, you wonder what that's going to look like.
It's true. To be honest, the first time I attended the WIA conferences, and this is going back like, I think almost 7, 8 years ago now, the first one I went to, I'm very bad with the timeline, but not when it comes to my work, but with overall timeline.
Good catch.
The first thing all those people would say there to me is like, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're so young." All of them are just like, I am just under 40, but I've been doing it, like I said, for 7.5, almost 8 years. So let's say I was, 30 or whatever when I first went there. And yeah, I would have to say the demographics were between 45 and 65.
Yeah.
But I think that also speaks to a certain thing as well, though. But we could chat forever about that stuff, but yeah.
Well, I think people are so grateful. I mean, just tons of great compliments here, and just a wealth of knowledge. And someone made the comment saying she's always going to make sure there's wallpaper left over. Like, how logical is that? I agree. So you've given us so many things to think about, John, and I really, I mean, you've taken your time for us, and I so appreciate that. And, it's just, I think you've helped a lot of people here today.
Awesome.
So really appreciate it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're going for. Is, I mean, I did, to be honest, obviously I love wall coverings, and that's what I do. It's not going away. It's not a fad. It's not a trend. I know designers hate that term. It's an additional element in design that completely changes a space.
Yeah.
Paint can't do what wall coverings can do. And that's not a dig on paint. It just can't. And it's been around for centuries. And I firmly believe that it's not just at its height. I feel that now the general public is becoming aware of it again. And it's going to be around for longer than you think. And I know there's a lot of designers out there that hate wallpaper, but if an individual person walked into 2 different rooms that had the same decor in it, and one had a natural fabric or whatever wallpaper in there, and the other one didn't, it's very hard to explain that feeling of that room. It changes completely. And I'm not just saying from the aesthetics, prettiness part, it changes the overall feel of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And because people ask me about naturals all the time, because yes, they're not cheap, but they're worth the investment. I rarely ever take down naturals. I do remove loud papers for the obvious reasons. People get tired of them, but I can tell you the other stuff, it stands the test of time. It really does.
I agree. You're getting tons of comments here. Preach, amen, they say. Anyway, John, again, I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you. Please tell me you'll come back at another time. I think there's just so much been left unsaid, but there's only so much time in a day. So we've really enjoyed it. And thank you to all of you, and come and join us again. We're going to be doing a wall covering CEU in a couple of weeks, just before the launch of our new wall covering books. So thanks again. Nice to see you all and hear all your comments. And John, again, thank you very much. And we do hope that you'll come back and visit us again.
For sure. Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care. Take care, everyone.